So if you Google Questcor Pharmaceuticals, which some of you can do right now, you'll find that it's commonly referenced along with Martin Shkreli, Valiant Pharmaceuticals as a price gouging and greedy firm. But today I'm going to share a different viewpoint, one that conflicts with this popular narrative, based on research I've done with Professor Burnham at Chapman University and Professor Lowe here at MIT. So I'll start by getting you all familiar with the key drug of this story. It's called Acthar gel. So it's an anti-inflammatory drug that's composed of ACTH. It's a hormone that they distill from pigs. And to this day, the manufacturing is actually a trade secret because it was developed about 70 years ago in the 1940s. And so there are no generic forms of Acthar to this day. And so that's why Questcor has had monopoly power over it. But it was approved for about 50 inflammatory diseases in 1952. And that's because prior to 1962, the FDA approved drugs solely based on safety, allowing doctors to make their own judgments on efficacy. But in addition to these 50 diseases, Acthar was also used off-label as a standard of care for this terrible disease. It's called infantile spasms. It's a severe form of epilepsy that impacts about 2,000 infants per year. And even though the drug was used off-label, meaning that it wasn't FDA approved for it, it's a life-saving drug for these babies because without it, they can die or develop severe mental retardation. So here's a chart of Acthar's pricing history. So in 2001, Questcor bought the drug, and they increased the price from $50 to $700. Every year after that, they continued to increase the price, perhaps what looks to be above average price increases, until 2006, when they increased the price from $1,650 to $23,000. So I can see some of you guys are laughing. So when I looked at this for the first time, it looks like a classic case of price gouging. And just to put in perspective, Martin Shkreli increased the price of Daraprim about 50-fold, and this comes out to be about a 500-fold price increase, which is about an order of magnitude higher. So you're all probably thinking, how in the world could this be anything but price gouging? And this is the story that never gets told, and I'm going to share it. But first, I'm going to show you 3 news articles that had similar opinions. So in 2016, a doctor named Gordon Smith published this in HBR. It's called Price Gouging and the Dangerous New Breed of Pharma Companies. Questcor bought the rights to Acthar gel. A company that did not contribute to the medicine's creation raised the price of a vial from $50 to $23,000. Then in 2008, shortly after the most controversial price hike, this was published in Wired. The Joint Economic Committee will open hearings in Congress on dramatic price hikes used in children, with a focus on companies such as Questcor. Trevor would end up mentally retarded for life without treatment. His mother, Danielle, will join those who testify against companies like Questcor. And then in 2015, published by Meg Terrell and CNBC, Bernstein analyst Ron and Gal pointed out many companies ratchet up drug prices when the market presents an opportunity. Gal pointed to 3 examples: Jazz Pharmaceuticals, Questcor, and Mylan. So we can see that from really all parties, from doctors, patients, the media, and even financial analysts, that this company is almost universally regarded as a price gouging, greedy company. So this is the different narrative. In the 1980s, Acthar actually became extremely unprofitable at $50 per vial. And that's because synthetic steroids like prednisone came around, and they replaced Acthar for almost all diseases except for infantile spasms. So before the 1980s, Acthar was actually a mass market drug used for a variety of inflammatory diseases, and so it was economically feasible at $50 per vial because of the high volume. But once it became an orphan drug, treating about 2,000 babies per year, the $50 price was just unsustainable. And so it's not surprising that if you look at the history of this drug, it exchanged hands numerous times because no companies wanted the responsibility of manufacturing it. In 1995, the French company that owned it actually decided to stop making the drug because it was so unprofitable. And as you might expect, outcry from physicians, doctors, and patients was so extreme that they were forced to continue making it at large operating losses. And so another company called Aventis then acquired the company in 1999, and they quickly tried to get rid of the drug. And so 2 years later, they sold it to Questcor Pharmaceuticals for $100,000. And in the pharmaceutical industry, $100,000 is absolute pennies. So this just shows you that no one wanted this, and it was essentially, dirt. So Questcor acquired Acthar in 2001, and you can see from Figure 1 that they still struggled to stay afloat. And they lost money every year, except in 2005, when they divested all of their non-neurology drugs for about $23 million. So even though they increased the price every year, and eventually in 2006, the price was $16.50 per vial, they still lost $10 million that year. And 2006 actually offers a great opportunity to understand what the Acthar business model looks like, because after they divested these drugs, their revenues were 95% composed of Acthar. And so we have to look at their financials. So can anyone offer some observations? Yeah?
I use G&A.
Right. So selling SG&A is selling general and administration expenses. So that includes overhead, what it costs to sell the drug and hire all the salespeople, and just to keep the lights on in the company. And so clearly, that's 135% of revenue. As a benchmark, the industry average for pharmaceutical companies is about 30%. And so clearly, this is abnormally high. And so we have to ask the question, why? And it really comes down to this key part of the company, which really is underappreciated, and that Acthar was not FDA approved for infantile spasms, even though it was the standard of care for the disease for decades. So this was an incredibly rare and unusual situation for the pharmaceutical industry. And it came up with a whole host of issues, which you'll see. So the key one is that it's illegal to directly advertise drugs for off-label diseases. If you're a sales rep and you want to advertise a drug that's on label, you can go to the doctor's office and knock on their door and give them free samples and initiate a conversation. But for off-label conditions, that's completely illegal. You can't even initiate a discussion. You have to wait, and you have to wait for the doctor to pick up the phone and call you. But if there's a doctor out there who doesn't know about your drug, how are they going to pick up the phone and call you to ask about it? So Questcor was in this really strange dilemma where they just couldn't market their drug, and so it was very expensive and very difficult for them to generate Acthar prescriptions. And so this was also problematic for patients. While we like to think that our doctors are always aware of everything in their field, we know that's just simply not the case because they're people too and they have lives, right? So without direct marketing, there were many neurologists who were unaware of Acthar's benefits for infantile spasms. And actually, the drug was underutilized prior to the price increase. And the second problem, you can see if you take a look at Acthar's label. So this is their label from 2015, a few years after it did eventually get FDA approved. So this is just a couple sections of a 16-page document that covers a variety of really important facts, such as what is the optimal dosage to use if you're treating a patient with infantile spasms. And without this regulation and without the drug being FDA approved, these guidelines weren't centralized and didn't really exist. And so you can see this is posing a very large problem. And so right now I want you to imagine you are Questcor's senior management. I want you to put yourself in the shoes of their CEO. His name was Don Bailey. And here's the situation. So Acthar's revenues in 2006 did not even pay for SG&A expenses, let alone R&D. Your operations netted $10 million in losses. You have $18 million in cash left. So at $10 million a year, that's about 1 to 2 years of runtime. And you aren't in a position to raise capital, of course, because you don't have positive cash flows. And you're not projected to have positive cash flows anytime soon. And finally, your submission to get Acthar FDA approved for the disease was rejected. So what do you do? And I'd like to open that up to you guys. Yeah.
Another country where it's approved or where you could at least market it.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah.
I guess if you're not comfortable raising the price yourself, you could look into selling it to someone else, kind of take the ethical burden off.
Yeah. Also a great idea.
I'm just curious why FDA doesn't achieve it. I mean, it doesn't do it for a reason, right? I think you could talk to FDA and find out why. I feel it's probably the only way.
The FDA didn't approve it because there was no clinical trials conducted, because the company couldn't afford to run clinical trials because it was losing $10 million.
Yeah. And when they did eventually get it approved, after the price increase, they didn't run a clinical trial because the FDA actually said it would be illegal to run a clinical trial, or rather unethical, because the drug was so important and you couldn't ethically randomize patients into a placebo or not.
This is a drug that was standard of care, right? It was standard of care among doctors that knew about the disease. And so if you randomized patients that had infantile spasm and you didn't give them the drug, that was considered unethical.
So there's a variety of potential options. So one, we could close down Questcor's operations and just stop manufacturing Acthar. That has some obvious negative implications for all these patients. Number two, as Tyler said, you could divest Acthar to another company, but it's unclear why any company would want to buy this drug if it's not profitable. And if they did buy it, then yeah, they might raise the price themselves. Number three, we could raise the price to make the business sustainable. And in fact, that's what Questcor did. So they increased the price from $1,650 to $23,000. It was met with a tremendous amount of controversy. But with this higher cost burden on the healthcare system, at this price, Acthar was actually a sustainable business, and they ensured that it would be available for all patients. So they expanded sponsorship and copay assistance programs, and these made sure that any patient who needed the drug would be able to have access to it. They would be given it for free. And in fact, in their 2008 annual filing, they reported that they were not aware of a single patient who needed the drug but couldn't get it. And in 2010, as we just mentioned, Questcor did finally achieve FDA approval for this disease. With the new capital from the price, they were able to hire the right team to get this done. So just to conclude, yeah.
Any information on the price after, is it still going through trials?
So they didn't have to run clinical trials to get it done because of what Professor Lowe had said. I can show you I can pull up the pricing chart again after, if you're interested. So we see that an old drug that's even 70 years old can become mispriced or underpriced due to evolving market conditions. The prednisone came in, replaced it for almost all of the diseases. And maybe that's not so surprising after a 70-year period that something like that could happen. Second, that we see profit motive is aligned with patient benefit here. And just because the price of a drug increases doesn't always mean that the company is being greedy and trying to price gouge its customers. And this principle is really at the core of the entire pharmaceutical industry. And here at Questcor Pharmaceuticals, we argue that it's no different. And three, we have to distinguish between these truly unacceptable price gouging behavior like Valeant Pharmaceuticals from some of these legitimate business decisions that we see help patients. And finally, as we discussed earlier, doing a health technology assessment would be helpful. It's not something that we've done yet, but of course it comes down to the trade-off of the higher cost on the healthcare system versus having an opportunity to save 2,000 lives per year.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Sam. Let me wrap it up by pointing out that we did this case study not because we want to be cheerleaders for Questcor. This is an ethical issue as to whether or not a $23,000 drug is really worthwhile. For parents of infants with infantile spasm, it's absolutely worthwhile. But again, the larger issue is, can we keep doing this for all these different diseases across all the different areas? Where is it going to stop? How are we going to balance all of these decisions? We can't make those decisions by ourselves. They're part of a much larger ecosystem where there's stakeholders.